Selling your home is a big financial move, and these are the 8 questions that protect your bottom line. Trust us, you're going to want to follow us from question number 8 all the way down to question number 1.
Yeah, it's really important. People just list their home because they're like, okay, I'm going to just list, I'm going to choose this realtor. But there's a bunch of questions you should be asking and a whole plan you should have when listing your home for sale.
Yeah. And as a seller, it's easy to feel overwhelmed or not sure who to trust or where to go when you're starting the initial process. So these questions will help you kind of dissect and dummy it down on a place to start where you go to list.
Exactly. And the first one is, what is my home worth? Which I think most of you, that's the number one question people want to know when they list their home. But the problem is you need data. And not every realtor gives you data. And sometimes the seller doesn't want data. They just feel like Joe, my neighbor, sold their home for $400,000 and my home's nicer than his, so it's worth $500,000. That's just kind of sometimes the data that the seller gives you. But as a realtor, it's your responsibility to pull comps. And comps are what has sold in the last 3 months in your area that is similar to your home. And then that is the real data.
Yeah. And in our area, if there's a specific comparable that's hard to find, we might have to go back 6 or 9 months, but really it's the what is your home worth and how did your realtor determine that? In your area, it's 3 months. In our area, it might be 6 to 9. Did they look at square footage, year built, or even quality of construction? Even if 2 homes are the exact same square footage, not all finishes are created equal. Some have concrete poured basements, some have wood basements. Not necessarily a good thing. So it just really depends how they arrived at that price and what they looked at to arrive at that price.
Yeah, and I get a lot of times where I'll pull comps, and especially if it's on a home that's been kind of fully redone or it's a lot newer. And my seller says, yeah, but my house is way nicer than those houses. You're not wrong. It is. So if this house sold for $550 and your house is the exact same layout, the exact same quality, but yes, it's nicer. Maybe you can get $600, but it's, you have to be realistic how much that bump gives you, because it doesn't give you, oh yeah, you're right. You can totally get $750,000 when all these comps are $650 because your home's nicer. Like now, if your home's bigger, or if your home sits on a bigger lot, or, there's things that do add value, but just because your finishes are nicer, it doesn't give you, it makes it easier to sell a lot of times, but it does not give you $100,000 more worth. And that's where people get tripped up, because then they want to put that onto their purchase price, or I'm sorry, their selling price, but then it sits because if you price it incorrectly, then it's just going to sit.
Which brings us to question number 7 on the countdown. What is your pricing strategy? And there's more to this than just finding the comps and pricing it at what we think. So bring us into that, Danielle.
Yeah, so you always want to go in with a pricing strategy. You never want to go in with, I'm going to list my house for $600,000 and I'm just going to let it sit there until it sells. Now, that is a strategy. Now, say you're somebody that's like, I don't care if I move or not. If I don't get $600,000 for my house, then I don't move. Then that's a fine strategy. And I have sellers that do that. And that's a totally good, fine strategy. However, if your house is vacant, if you really need to move, if you really want to move, that's not a good strategy, because the way I look at it is I'll price a home for just about any amount a seller wants me to, but we have a plan. So I think your home's worth $500. You think it's worth $580. Fine, let's list it for $580. Let's see what we get, because we can, there's a lot of details other than just selling it that we can look at.
Agree. And, creating demand is a good thing. So if you price it more strategically, closer to what you think a sale price would be, then serious buyers are going to be watching that right away. And they're going to, okay, yes, we know that that's a realistic number or price range. If you price it too high and you end up chasing the market down, then it's going to be like trying to catch a falling knife. They're going to wait for you to make more price reductions. So what's the incentive for them to come in and make an offer if they're just going to wait and see what happens? So it really is, marketing and not just listing price. You have to market it and you have to create buzz around the property and why it's a good value proposition.
Yeah, and you need a strategy too on, your showings. So if you list a property and you're getting no showings, then, that means it's too high. It means it's kind of significantly too high if you're getting no showings, like maybe even, 20% too high sometimes. However, if you're getting showings, but you're just not getting any offers, then you're just a little bit off, like that's when you might want to just take it down $10,000, just kind of see, because you're getting people that are wanting to see it, but they're just not making an offer because they feel like the offer they want to make is too far off from your price and you're not going to take it. So, that's the data that you want to look at, and whenever I have someone that lists and we get no showings, then I'm kind of like, okay, just so you know, it doesn't mean it's not going to sell. Like I just had a house in Scottsdale that I listed it, it was priced too high and it sold even though we hardly had any showing. So it can happen, but like if you really need to sell it, that's not a great strategy. And you have to look at that data. And, people get frustrated like, what's wrong with my property? We're not getting any showings. It's something that you did. And it's like, no, as long as the pictures are good and, we're putting it out there, it's more just, you just have to be honest that the price is just off. Now, it does change the higher in price point you go. So there are luxury listings. I mean, that's different because there's not as many buyers. So you're not going to have a bunch of people, looking at the property. But, when you're talking about your average property, I mean, that's just how it is.
Yep. Absolutely. And luxury is kind of a whole nother topic that we could do a show on, and maybe we will in the future. But
yes.
Question number 6 is, what should I do or not do before listing? Some things are meaningful to do, and some things it's like, nope, skip it, let the next buyer do that. Though that is a really good question to ask your agent because they are going to know the ins and outs of your specific market that you're in and what the buyer expectations are in that market.
I find it funny. There's a lot of times where people want to do a lot of work to their house before they list it. And there's certain things you should do. Like if there's water stains anywhere from maybe an old sink leak or an old air conditioner leak, like, yes, you want to fix all that. You want it to, want it to look presentable. But, I have people like, I'm going to rip up this carpet because it's old and nasty and I'm going to put down some new carpet that's fresh and nice. And it's like, yeah, but nobody really wants carpet anymore. Or a lot of people don't. So if they're just going to rip it up anyways, it's not really going to help. They're still going to look at it as carpet. Or, people say, oh, I need to paint because, my paint's a little bit dinged up. It's like, that's not going to move the needle. Like you're not going to be able to get that $3,000 additional that it just costed you to paint on your purchase price. Now, if your place is painted yellow all in the interior, then maybe it's worth it to paint because it's going to make it look nicer. But if it's just because you think the paint's a little dingy, so there's a lot of things people want to do because it's stuff that's kind of what they would want. If they were buying it, they would want new carpet. If they were buying it, they would want this. This when you show people houses, and I had to learn this when I first started. People do not want what you want. Like, you kind of go in like, oh yeah, like this is a great house. And they're like, oh my God, I hate this house. It's whatever. And then you walk into a house and you're like, oh heck no. And they're like, yeah, we want to make an offer on this one. We love how big the yard is. And you're like, wait, what? So you just don't know what people want. So if you're trying to put money into your house, it's just really a lot of times going to waste.
Yeah, and that's where I go and do a seller, like a pre-consultation, and they'll bring me to the kitchen and be like, well, what should we do in here? And then they'll bring me to the next room. What should we do in here? And I say, whoa, before I answer any of that, I want to look at your whole house as a whole. And then of the 10 potential projects that you're thinking of doing, let's prioritize items 1, 2, and 3 and forget the rest, So it is like looking at everything from a whole, because technically any house, even new construction, could use something, So it's being strategic.
Yeah, it's good to do a few things to freshen it up, but it depends what the cost of those things are. If you can do something for $50 to make the house look nicer, or $200, then let's do that. But if you're about to dump $5,000 into it onto paint or it's just like, you're not going to get that money back. And it's funny what people look at too. Like this girl, I was selling her house, and she had all these little things she wanted to do that I'm like, no, 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 no. But her oven was broken. So there had to be tape holding. And this is a nice house. She just never really used her oven. But there was tape like holding the oven door closed. And I said, we need to get a new oven. And she's like, really? Like that? And I'm like, yes, because as soon as somebody walks in and they see the kitchen and they see this whole tape thing, they're going to think everything in this house is falling apart, but it's not. It's a nice house. But it's funny because to her, that wasn't important. That was kind of like, it's a stove. Everyone knows if you want to buy a new stove, just buy a new stove. But yet she wanted to do all these little things that I'm like, those don't matter at all. And nobody's going to care, you know? So, you know, it really does take that knowledge because people, you know, everyone cares about something different, you know, but there's certain things that are glaring, like tape on any appliance, that you really just need to get a new appliance. And then, of course, she's like, okay, I'll go to the store. And I'm like, no. I'm like, call my handyman, get a used stove on OfferUp that's super nice or Facebook Marketplace. And then, like $300 later, she had a stove and it looked great. You know what I mean? So it's also that, too, is doing things on a budget, not doing things like you would for yourself because you are selling it.
For sure. And it's just super important. Avoid like big major projects because you're not going to get them back. But the small things do matter depending on what it is. One of the simplest things before we move on to the next, doors. Oftentimes it's like, what's your first impression? And sometimes it's like kids or pets that have been on the doors and you walk in and there's like a black spot on the door from like everybody's oil and handprints and stuff. That costs nothing to clean. So it's like, wipe off the door. Like simple stuff like that goes so far. So,
but there is one other thing before we jump off of this. Yeah. There are things that you should also fix. Like, so people spend a lot of time on the aesthetic. They spend a lot of time on like, oh, I should paint or I should get a new stove or I should, you know, whatever, get a landscaper out here and clean up the whole yard. But what they don't like to spend time on is stuff they can't see. So I'll say, hey, we need to get an HVAC person out to evaluate the HVAC system. We need to get a roofer out to evaluate the roof. And I hear, oh, it's fine. It works fine. It's totally fine. I don't have any issues with it.
Yeah.
And those things are like, you know, usually to have them come look at it's like $100, you know. But the truth is that is a problem once you get into the inspection, you know, and I would rather have my HVAC guy say, this needs $300 worth of work, and then we get it certified, then somebody else brings in some random HVAC company and says, we need to replace this whole unit, and now we're at a standstill. So I think people do skimp on these like really quick, easy evaluations, and they shouldn't, because you should go into your inspection with confidence that you have no issues with the house because you already checked, you know, the big systems. Versus, you know, kind of getting screwed on that back end. So that's like a really big thing for sellers.
That is a really good point. And, you know, question number 5 is, how will you market your home beyond the MLS? You know, the days of just going and putting a sign in the yard are long gone and over. You know, that's so 20 years ago. What are you going to do now based upon how today's consumers look for properties and are trying to find their next home? What are you doing to get in front of them? So that's huge.
Yeah, it is huge. And, you know, there's 2 parts to this. So one, if your home's overpriced, there's, you know, nothing I can do marketing wise to fix that. So like I still go back to the MLS in that way. Like you can't overprice your home. However, if your home's priced correctly, there's a lot of marketing we can do to make your home stand out above the other homes. And I think that is really important. And, you know, Zillow's doing a lot of this where now you can post videos and you can post 3D walkthroughs and you can spend a little money to have a little bit of a nicer page. And you can also on your listing descriptions, those are super important because people do read them and AI does pull from them. So those items are very, very important beyond just posting on the MLS.
Yeah. And so it could even be things, you know, if your realtor has a strong social media presence, it could be, hey, new listing coming later. Then people are checking back for it. And hey, we're going live and here's the open house. And even if you don't get a lot of people through an open house, it's still a marketing point. It's still a visibility point when you're entering that in and it filters through Zillow and all of the other sites. Huge, huge reach when it comes to that. So social media and not just putting a sign in the yard are absolutely questions you should be asking when you go to list a property.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the next one is, what's your plan to get buyers through quickly? So I think that this is an interesting one because you don't want things to sit. You need to have a plan to get people through right away.
Yeah. And I think that kind of goes back to the first impressions and creating that buzz. So it could be a combination of, enhanced realty, enhanced photography, virtual staging, high definition video listings, different things like that, besides just snapping a couple pictures and posting them up online and doing the hope and pray method, because
Yeah,
that's not a strategy in today's market.
it is definitely not a strategy. And I think that the sooner you can start getting buyers through, the better, because people have a less of a tolerance now for days on market than they used to. We're in a very, a lot of our buyers follow Zillow, and it's like new listing here, new listing there. And a lot of people set their search parameters only for 30 days back. They don't even think to set their search parameters for 60, 90, 120 days. That is just how it is now.
Yeah. So on that note, if you're looking for a deal and you're not finding, something that is new on the market, set your search parameters back that long, and maybe those sellers are becoming a little bit more motivated. So just kind of a tip if you're a home buyer to make sure you know what your search parameters are set at. But
absolutely. And the next one is, how will your realtor help you evaluate the offer beyond price? And I think this one's really important.
Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, go ahead.
When you get multiple offers on a property, how do you compare and break those down for your sellers?
I like to do everything in writing first versus just verbally, because I think people need to see things and evaluate things and think them over, especially if it's like offers that are very similarly good. It's not like an obvious choice. So I like them to see it in writing, but there are nuances to every offer, and it is important to understand what those nuances are. And, people that just look at price, like, you have to look at the quality of the offer too. Like, how much are they putting down? Are they a first-time home buyer versus an investor? It's more, you know what I mean? It's more than just the numbers. Are they buying it as is? Are we going to have issues on the inspection? Like, maybe this is a better offer, but maybe they plan on giving us a nickel and dime inspection report all the way down and all the way through. And that's a strategy on the buyer side potentially. So you always have to kind of gauge that. And obviously the seller is going to decide what they want to do, but a lot of times they do ask for your feedback. And when they do, I try to keep it with the cleanest offer, the easiest offer. I don't let as is always really helpful, I think, when I'm selling. Because we're in different markets. So right now we're in a buyer's market. So what we're seeing on my end for sellers is you get through the inspection and you have another 15, sometimes 20, minimum $8,000 that they want off on their offer on a $600,000 house. So this is real money. It's not like, oh, do we want to credit them $3,000 or not? I mean, this is a lot, and deals are falling apart over it. So for me, you can't just look at like, okay, these people are offering us $5,000 more than these people. Like, that's not enough. You have to really understand their experience in buying. Are they going to care about a lot of this stuff? Is any of this going to turn them off? Because on an inspection, you're always going to have thousands of dollars worth of things that you could request done. You're also going in, you have an older HVAC or whatever it is, that can cause problems. So for me, I just like to be really clear on what all that is. Like, how about you? Because I know you're in a different market, because you're more of a seller's market. So the buyers aren't really requesting like that because they can't, because you could just move on to the next offer, where we're not really in that state.
So this is fresh on my mind. Sat down with a seller last week. We had 6 offers on their house that was on the market for 3 days. So definitely a seller's market. The offers were, all over the board, but I would say there was 3 that were very, very close. So I still created a net sheet for every offer with the terms, the summary of the terms, the earnest money, the type of financing, the closing date. Closing date was one thing that was very, important for my seller. And so we kind of narrowed it down to those that were the highest net, but also a closing date that worked. So it was kind of little by little, like you said. And then it was down to the nitty gritty of how long is the inspection period? Is there an inspection? How much earnest money? And we ultimately ended up counter offering one of the best offers for a little bit more earnest money because they liked other terms of that offer better, but their earnest money was a little lower. So the purchase price stayed the same, but we counter offered back on some other terms. So the sellers got it was a win-win situation for all, but the sellers got ultimately what they wanted. So
yeah, and I think that that's great, and I think that it's important though, because some people just want to look at the price, and some people do. Like, so I have sellers that it's like they don't really care. They just want to take the highest offer. So we just do that because that's what they want to do. But you really should be looking more closely, because you and I have seen a lot of deals fall apart, and we've seen a lot of deals go sideways, and we've seen a lot of weird things on different transactions. And so we kind of know what you need to look for. And to your point, like the type of deal, like I just dealt with selling a property with an FHA loan. It got delayed a month because the FHA, the spot approval, all the things, and because FHA can take longer. So, and it was okay, but you have to know that can happen. And FHA is much harder to get approved. So you have to know that that's a thing too. And they're putting less money down. And, you have to look at all the things on the risk of the buyer, especially right now, I think, because banks are getting tighter on lending. And it's getting harder to get a loan. So if somebody is just putting down 3% or 5%, what happens if it doesn't appraise? Because that's at the very end. Like, you can get through and wait and be off market for 3 weeks before a home doesn't appraise. And if a home doesn't appraise, either the buyer has to come out of pocket for the difference, or the seller has to decrease the purchase amount so that the buyer can either come out of pocket or not. And if nobody will do either or can't do either, then it goes back on the market. And so those are huge things. Like, if somebody's putting down 20%, it automatically makes their offer stronger.
For sure, because we're just actually dealing with our first low appraisal that I've seen in several years. And it wasn't just 5 or 10 grand low. We're talking 60 grand too low on a low 300s house, which is huge. And we had multiple offers on the house. It was marketed on the MLS. I think that appraiser might have been stuck in the 1990s, but it's like, so now what? And these buyers are, one in multiple offers. And now what? We're contesting the appraisal, providing our comparables, but you have to have a good agent that's on your side that knows how to handle those things, as well as a good lender on your team. So
yeah. And a lot of times too, on the appraisal, like, I don't know if you ever do this, but I do when I think it's tight. I will send a bunch of comparables just to make the appraiser's job a little easier and maybe make it all work out for both sides. But it does help. But to your point, we've been seeing things not appraised as well. And, that can be a problem, especially when the amount of money down is very low.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that one important piece, or the next question which is question number 2, how will you handle showings and communications? All realtors do this different, even from location to location is different, as far as how you get notified of showings, how you get feedback from clients that have walked through your properties. So just asking those questions and setting expectations on, do you need 24-hour notice for a showing? Are you okay with same-day showings being scheduled? How is feedback typically provided? All of those things just make the process go so much more smoothly. And then you're able to gauge right away if your feedback comes and 3 of the 5 showings say it's priced too high, maybe you want to pivot sooner than later on price. Or maybe they all commented on, a specific repair that needs to be made. Well, then let's just do it. So those are all important pieces to keep in mind, and it makes the transaction go so smoothly.
It does. And, communication's big because a couple things. Like, do you want your realtor there for showings? Like, I have clients, especially in the luxury market, where I go to every single showing, but other people don't want that. And I would say most people don't want that, but it's important that you know that going in. Like, is your realtor going to be there? Are they going to be working their own open houses, or are they going to be doing open houses at all? And what's your expectation on how many open houses? And what's your your expectation on communication? I have clients where I message them and they don't get back to me for 24 hours. And then I have to talk to them and tell them that, listen, like, that doesn't work for me either, because a lot of this is time sensitive and I don't need you to respond back in 5 minutes, but I need you to respond back in a couple hours, because, when people have questions, they're not just having questions, when you answer it the next day, it's ruining that sales funnel basically on a lot of deals. Yep. So it goes back and forth, but I think communication, I think the better that your realtor communicates with you is you should assume that's how they communicate with the other realtors looking to buy your place as well. Because I've dealt with a lot of realtors that have awful communication. In fact, I'm in a deal with one now, and it's like, I might not hear back from her for 2 days when I message her, and we're all just sitting around waiting. And if this wasn't such a good deal, we would probably be walking away from it. But also, I wonder partially if it's such a good deal because it's been on the market so long, because she is awful at communication, like she isn't communicating with people that want to buy the property. And now that we're under contract, it's still hard to communicate with her. I mean, we almost had to cancel the whole inspection because the inspector couldn't get in the house and couldn't get a hold of her. So it's like, there's a lot, goodness. But you have to understand that going in, how your realtor's not really communicating with you great, but when it comes to, other agents and buyers, they're communicated with fantastically. No, how you do something is how you do everything. So if you're not getting responses and you're frustrated, well, so are the buyers. And in Phoenix, we're not in the market that a buyer has to deal with that. They can move on to other properties that have very receptive realtors. And usually when somebody's looking, they've liked more than one place. You're kind of like, I like this place and I kind of like this place. And, this realtor's just getting back right away to me. They already have all their questions answered and we don't know on this other one yet. Which one do you think we're going to go with? And honestly, which one do you think I want to go with? I hate dealing with agents that can't communicate. So, so for me, I'm like,
it's frustrating. It's frustrating.
Yeah. I mean, one deal starts to look more appealing because I'm like, hey, this girl's got back to us. She's really nice. They're willing to work with us. This girl, I haven't heard from her. I don't know. We're still waiting. So we can just keep waiting, or we can make an offer over here. So like, that's the thing too, is, when somebody's not communicating with someone else, they're just doing it across the board. And one of the biggest things that we do as realtors is we're awesome communicators, and that's how we get deals done.
Yeah, at least the good ones are.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
Which brings us to question number 1. And I think it is important to have this conversation on the front end before your house even goes on the market. Question number 1 is, what happens if my home does not sell quickly? So even if you tackle everything up front, do your homework on pricing, you get pricing correct, you get showings, and your home is just not selling, what is your agent's plan B? Because, they can't control everything. They can look at all of the data. They can work with you on a price. We can advise on everything, but we don't have a crystal ball, and we don't know what buyers are in the market at any given time necessarily. So what is the plan on pricing adjustments? Or if the market shifts, what's the plan?
You always have to have that conversation, and you always should have a plan of how to tackle that. And like I said, you have to look at the data and you have to look at your situation. So like I always go back to, are we getting showings and are we getting offers, and what's your timeline? Because if you don't have if you don't have a strict timeline, we can just wait. I mean, that's what I just did on a house under contract. I mean, it's been on the market for almost 4 months and we just got an offer, so you never know, that can happen. But if it just depends, because people, if it's vacant because you're living somewhere else already, you're going to want that more urgently, because how much money are you paying in tax, insurance, and mortgage and, bills to keep this property on the market for 4 months? Well, it's costing you something. So what is that? And then is it worth it to wait for that?
Or is it worth it to drop the price and forgo those expenses, bite the bullet, and be done with it? Mm-hmm. So you don't have to worry about budgeting for these ongoing carrying costs.
Plus, I always get really nervous. You know this because your family members bought a house that was vacant for me. But I get worried about a vacant unit because there's water and there's bugs and there's things that can happen if no one is living there. And I can't tell you how many times I went to see a house and you discover something that you're like, text the agent like, hey, I don't know if you know this, but there's water. I don't know if you know this, but there would look like a fire almost started. There's like black all over the ceiling. That happened one time, And that
I've
freaks
had
me out
those two
too.
things happen in the last week.
Yeah.
Seriously. It's like, yep, yep,
Yeah, exactly. Because it's sitting empty and no one's there. And a lot of times the
yep.
seller, they've moved on. They're not checking on it. And you also have people in and out. And people mess with stuff. They turn on
Yeah.
one time I walked into this unit and it was so hot. It was probably 85 degrees. And I like the
Oh
heat.
my God.
And I texted the realtor. I'm like, listen, somebody left your thermostat on and it was at 85 in here. So I'm turning it down to like 60, and people do that stuff and people mess, and that's not like, that's just a big electric bill, luckily, but still people are messing with stuff. And so, unless you're checking on it all the time, you have to be mindful of that too, because it can be a stress and it can be a problem.
Yeah. I mean, just a couple weeks ago, when it was still cold in Minnesota, below freezing, I walked into a house. I was meeting the sellers there. It was vacant. And they're like, oh my God, we're so glad that we set up to meet today. We got here, the thermostat batteries were dead. The house was literally at 32 degrees and there was ice in the toilets. I thank God the water lines did not burst, but literally 12 more hours and they would have been so effed.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Better term.
Yep.
So it's like, thank God.
Well, and truthfully, if you have a vacant house, you really should have it all smart if it's going to be empty so that you can be checking certain things and, water monitors and all that. But, so there is something when, how much do you want to leave the house just sitting there? And also as your days on market go up, you have less leverage. So, like this house that my client just put under contract, she put it under contract in South Scottsdale, 3-bed, 2-bath, $515. That's a great deal. However, they started it at $600 and it was too expensive. So when their days on market had been on market for 8 or 9 months, they just, to your point, kept cutting the price. Well, people don't look back that far. That's the problem. Is it's been on for 8 months. A lot of people don't look back that far, so they weren't seeing it. And there is a strategy to that too. When do you take it down and then relist it? Because that's a strategy too. If you take it down off the MLS for a month and then you relist it, then you're a new listing again. I mean, that is a strategy too. If it's been sitting too long, I've had clients do that before. When
I just did, and the house we listed it at this like $5,000 less than what it was listed. We got multiple offers just by taking it off and putting it back on. And the sellers did do a couple of things, but nothing like over the top or crazy. It was just market timing, notification of a new listing, and a slightly lower price, but really not that much.
Yeah, and that really does work. And I've even had it where I take a listing down because I had this lady, I was trying to sell her condo, super hard to sell. And it just didn't work. And we always had a plan that we would leave it on for 90 days. And after that, she would just rent it because, and I take it down and then I get a message, hey, we've been following your condo. It was almost like FOMO, can we come see it? I'm like, yeah, that's fine. She's getting renters and, she's about to post it up for rent. They bought it. So that can happen too, where, because we all have those houses that we're following and we're like, oh, let's see if they lower the price more. Let's see what happens with this. And when it disappears, I've done it where it's like, hey, like, where'd that house go? What's happening with that house? Because, like we've been looking at that house. We just weren't ready yet to go see it or make an offer. So it's a real thing. And these are just real conversations you have to have with your realtor. And if your realtor is literally just like, yeah, cool, I'll list your house, fine, great. That's not a good realtor because there's a lot of conversations that have to be had. And also if your house has been sitting for, I'd say 30 days. I mean, I like to give it a little time. So if it's been sitting for 30 days and you're not getting any traction, you shouldn't have to bring up stuff to your realtor. They should bring up stuff to you. They should have a plan for this. It's not really, shouldn't be on you to figure out, okay, we're sitting for 30 days. We don't have anything. What do we do? Like they should be coming to you with that.
For sure. And I think one thing that a seller could do, especially if you're interviewing different agents, is be careful of an agent that might just, agree with you on your higher price to win the listing because they're doing you a disservice. So if you're interviewing several agents, like let's say you interview 3 agents, 2 of them tell you your house is worth 400 and the next one tells you it's worth 440. Well, what is that one seeing that the other 2 are not? Are they just telling you what you want to hear so they get the listing? Is that really a good thing? No, it's not. So you have to stop and think about some of those things, when you're interviewing agents.
Yep. And if you want to list it for 440, that's fine too. But like you said, you have to have a plan at that 2-week mark to assess how your house is doing, because you don't want it to be sitting at 440 for 3 months and then have a conversation about it, because then it's been sitting too long.
Yep. And it always takes time to think about things too before you are mentally ready to lower the price. So if you're going to try to list it high, which I advise against, but if you try, then have that predetermined date, price drop all lined up and agreed upon ahead of time if it's necessary.
Yep. Well, for those looking to sell a house, make sure you check out Tara and I's Buyer's Guide. You can also message either of us on Instagram, and we're happy to answer any questions. I'm in the Arizona area.
And I'm in Minnesota and South Dakota.
Yeah, so feel free to reach out and make sure you download the guide. It's super helpful.
See you next week.